In this episode, we're going to be replacing the lower front control arm in this Nissan Rogue. So let's get this car in the garage. All right, so this is the control arm bushing, and as you can see, it's pretty torn up. It's cracked. This car only has 160,000 miles on it, and to me that's low mileage, but some of you might have had cars that these control arms go bad way sooner than that. Most of my other cars have lasted over 200,000 miles before I've had to replace a control arm. But let's go ahead and pull this thing out. In order to remove the front lower control arm, there are 4 bolts that secure it. So there are 2 bolts that go directly into the frame. 1 bolt secures through the bushing into the frame, and then the ball joint has a bolt that goes through the knuckle after you insert the ball joint into the knuckle. So unfortunately, it's really close quarters in here, and as you can see, we don't have very good access to the bolts on the control arm, so we're gonna have to roll this sway bar up, and to do that we're just gonna pull out these sway bar links on both sides. I'm actually gonna replace these in a different video to show that how they're bad. There's a little bit of load on it right now just because I have the tire rotated in, but you can see it's pretty loose, so we're gonna go ahead and replace those. But if you're going to remove these, it's just these 2 bolts, and you just want to make sure the car is nice and level and there's no load on the sway bar. All right, so we got both of the sway bar links out, and as you can see, the sway bar just sways freely at this point. And so as it's lowered, I can access that bolt pretty easily. And then if I gotta get to that bolt nut over there to put something on it or pull it out, I can pretty much just move this up and down. All right, so now I'm gonna work on these bolts that connect it to the frame. Now I'm going to work on the bolt with the bushing through it. And now I'll work on this last bolt, that knuckle bolt. So now with all the bolts removed, let's see if we can get this out without any other tools. It's moving. So I'm a little surprised that the ball joint came out without force. In all the years I've been working on cars, that's the very first time that's ever happened, and usually I need a ball joint separator of some type, and I've got to do some hammering. It could be because I actually recently replaced some parts on this axle, and I did have to separate the knuckle and ball joint, so that could be it. Sometime in the last 2 years I've done that. But hey, you know, I'm happy. All right, so comparing the old to new, they line up and match up pretty good. As you can see, this ball joint moves relatively freely, and that's on the old one. And the bushing is pretty much completely dissolved, and that's why the car was clanking and the tire was able to be moved by hand forward and backwards and all over. And just for comparison, here's the new bushing. So you can see it's complete. There are no gaps in it at all. All right, so it's time to put this thing back together, but before we do that, I do want to mention something about the CV axle. When you've got this thing completely apart, there's really no support on the hub right here. And if you yank on the hub, this CV axle right here can pop right out. And so you want to be real gentle with this and just move it just the minimal amount that you have to. Otherwise, if you pop that CV joint out, sometimes you can pop it back in, but if you can't, you might have to actually take the boot off and it can get real messy and complicated. All right, so for reinstalling this, we're gonna put the bushing in first, then we're gonna install the 2 bolts that go through this that anchors to the frame, and then we'll deal with the ball joint. All right, so change of plans. We're gonna put the ball joint in first, then we're gonna lift up the ball joint entire and see if we can line up the horizontal bushing, this bushing right here, so we can get those screws in. So let's line up this ball joint with that hole that's gotta go into the knuckle. So it's in there, so when we put the jack under there, it'll lift it into place a little bit more. You don't want to go too high on it because then you can't get the bolt through, but we'll deal with that when we get to it next. Go, pin went in. All right, so that one's in. So now let's see if we can lift this up a little bit. There we go. Now these other bolts should slide hopefully in. Much easier. That's definitely the way to do it. So since that one is going in, I'm just going to put that all the way down. Alright, got you guys repositioned so you can better see these bolts going in. Again, if you get the wheel hub in the right position and it's lined up, and these bolts thread straight on. But if you don't, then you would risk stripping the bolts. So you gotta be pretty careful to make sure that you're going in straight on. You definitely don't want to use any power tools, at least at the beginning, until you know you're threaded pretty good. Since we're raised up on the jack stand, we can go ahead and torque these down to the proper torques. Generally speaking, when you're putting on control arms, you don't want to torque down with the wheel hub hanging. You want to have it at about ride height. Honestly, I'm not sure if it makes a difference with this specific design, because the bushing that's in tension in there, or compression, there's no difference in it whether it's hanging or not. There's some designs where it makes a big difference because the bushing will go into tension if it's hanging, and then it'll be relaxed at ride height. So I got my torque wrench set for this car for these bolts at 126. All right, so I also went ahead and changed out the driver's side. And so now we're ready to put on the sway bar links on both sides. All right, so that finishes up the sway bars. The only thing left to do is to put the wheels back on and set the car down on the ground.